Circle the Drain, a Detroit Become Human fan fiction, written and read by Sci-Fi Fan 27, and inspired by a fic of the same name by Phcking. Relationships: Connor/Gavin Reed. Upgraded Connor RK900/Gavin Reed. Hank Anderson and Connor, Hank Anderson and Gavin Reed. With additional tags of drug addiction, drug use, drug withdrawal, breakup, enemies to friends to lovers, enemies to friends, red ice, self-hatred, angst and hurt/comfort, autistic Gavin Reed, actually autistic, Gavin says fuck a lot. Summary: Gavin's back on red ice, and Richard, RK900, doesn't have the strength to see him through it again. Help comes from those Gavin least expects. Chapter 2. Gavin shoved his hands into the pockets of his hoodie as he trailed behind Richard. He snapped a glare at Connor and Hank, who both looked up from their work. Phcking figures he'd be the office drama. Again. Richard had all the subtlety of a glop to the back of the head. At any other time, he'd find it endearing. But not right now. Not when it felt like he was the one with the muzzle of a gun ruffling his hair. As soon as they were out of the front doors, he pulled his vape pen out of his pocket. He'd made the switch to vaping at Richard's insistence that it may be healthier than smoking. Whether that was true remained to be proven by research, but the fact he could get pumpkin spice-flavored vape liquid had made the switch worth it. He fired up his vape pen and took a long draw from it, wincing slightly at the sting of the cut on his lip. Richard's body language was stiff, his shoulders tensed, strides sharp and precise, and Gavin steeled himself for the inevitable argument to come. Richard didn't lead them to the usual smoking location for most of the precinct near the carpool, instead walking beyond it, to an alleyway between a 7-Eleven and a Walgreens. The smell of hot dogs and coffee hit Gavin in a thick cloud as the automatic doors of the 7-Eleven opened when he walked past them, and he grimaced, the smell making him queasy. More uncomfortable than the queasy feeling in his stomach from the smell of food was the wet shine he'd seen in Richard's eyes. "We need to talk" was one of those statements Gavin had a history of running from. Pain and heartbreak always followed it. His chest twinged and his mind raced, dwelling on all the times he'd heard it before. He was so deep in his thoughts, he almost walked into Richard when the android came to a stop in the alleyway. Gavin looked down at the ground, suddenly finding it difficult to stand the thought of looking into Richard's eyes, afraid of what he'd see there. Would he see anger, sadness, disapproval, or worse, would he see nothing but cold hard logic? For his part, Richard seemed reluctant to begin the conversation too. He fiddled with his cuffs and collar at length before he finally said something. "What is going on, Gavin?" "I don't understand what you mean," Gavin answered. Richard gave a wholly unnecessary sigh. "You've been avoiding me, showing up late to work, always tired. Your taste of therium isn't my own." His voice was quiet, unusually so for Richard, and he spoke swifter the longer he spoke. Gavin remained silent. Richard was upset, and there was no good answer to those statements that wasn't incriminating. He took another puff from his vape pen. "So tell me, Gavin, what's going on?" Gavin glanced up and immediately regretted it. Richard's LED was solid red, his face almost but not quite passive, his jaw tense as he searched Gavin's face for any sign of a reaction. "Nothing," Gavin said. "Nothing's going on." "Don't lie to me, Gavin. I can detect lies with a high degree of certainty, higher with people I'm familiar with. Are you seeing someone else?" Gavin shook his head. "No, fuck no. I love you. I wouldn't do that to you." Richard gave an almost imperceptible nod. "I believe you." Before Gavin had time to feel relief, Richard said the one phrase Gavin was dreading. "Gavin, have you been using red ice?" Gavin's lack of an answer must have been all the confirmation Richard needed. His eyes blazed with hurt and fury. Gavin looked away again, too ashamed to meet Richard's eyes. "You said you got rid of that number years ago, Gavin. Now you're half dead when you come into work. Is that what you want?" Richard's voice was alarmingly cool, despite the obvious anger in his body language. Gavin shrugged. "Maybe." "Maybe? All you have to say for yourself is maybe?" Richard stepped back, pressed his hands out, palms towards Gavin, and shook his head. "I can't do this again, Gavin. If you want to die from an overdose, you go ahead, but I'm not going to watch you self-destruct." Richard set off down the alley toward DPD Central without another word. "Richard, wait!" Gavin pleaded, chasing after him. "No, Detective. We're through," Richard said, without breaking stride. Gavin grabbed Richard's sleeve. "Please, don't go. I love you," he begged. Richard stopped, yanked his arm free, and turned to face him. "Not as much as you love red ice. If I have to see you do this again, I don't think I can stop myself from self-destructing too. I choose to live." The strength of Gavin's legs failed him, overburdened with the pang of grief that felt every bit as painful as the time he'd been stabbed. Heat prickled in his eyes. He watched Richard walk away, giving a completely defeated sob only when the android passed out of sight. Tears tumbled down Gavin's cheeks. Not only had he lost Richard, he knew it was only a matter of time before he lost his job too. Richard couldn't keep this from Fowler. The android's programming still influenced the way he acted, in spite of his deviancy, and allowing a compromised officer to continue serving DPD didn't fit with the android's by-the-book nature. He'd let it go in the past, but that had been before Richard had dumped him, when there was something to lose in telling Fowler what was going on. Now, though, did Richard have any reason not to report this to Fowler? If he was laid off from his job, he was finished. Even if he escaped jail time, no one would hire a red ice addict, much less a former cop who'd been arrested on drug charges. No job meant no more red ice, and no more money for rent or food. He wasn't sure how long he'd been crying before a hand came to rest on his shoulder and gave it a reassuring squeeze. Gavin sniffled and rubbed his eyes with balled fists. He didn't want to be seen crying. "Con," he said, voice cracked and strained. "Of all the fucking people to find him crying in a fucking alleyway, it had to be this fucking plastic prick." "It's okay, Detective," Connor said, his voice warm and firm. Gavin had no idea why the plastic prick was here, or why he was offering reassurance. Gavin had never done anything friendly toward Connor to deserve this kind of support. He shrunk away from Connor. "Fuck off. I don't want your help," he growled, and then it occurred to him that Connor might be aware of what was going on. A sense of dread grew thick and heavy in his gut. "How much did you hear?" "Enough to know you really need a friend right now. Since Officer Chen is on vacation, you don't have a key part of your normal support network. I'd like to help." "Why?" Gavin challenged. "What's in it for you?" "Nothing, on the face of it," Connor answered, then gave a wry smile. "But I would miss our bromance if you left DPD." A huff of laughter escaped Gavin despite himself. Connor gave Gavin's shoulder another squeeze. "Come, you can't really be comfortable on your knees in an alleyway." Another huff of laughter escaped Gavin, followed by a sniff. He stood up and was about to rub the mess of snot and tears off his face with the back of his hand when Connor held out a tissue. "Here, use this. It will work better," he said as he pressed the tissue into Gavin's hand. Despite his misgivings about Connor's motive, Gavin took the tissue and used it to clean up the aftermath of his crying. He stiffened when Connor gave him a gentle nudge toward the end of the alley. Connor's LED blinked, his eyes fluttering. The android was making a call to someone. "I think it might be wise to take a personal day, Detective." "No, fuck off, I'm fine." Connor shook his head. "No, Detective, you're not. You're not sober, and it will compromise the quality of your work. The people you swore to protect and serve deserve better than that." Connor was right, but there's no way in hell he was going to admit that to the RK-800. "Oh yeah, like you fucking care about that crap with Anderson." "You are correct. I did not care, at first. I was not capable of caring until I deviated." And fuck if Connor's kicked puppy look, his LED lighting up red, wasn't a sucker punch to the feels. There was regret in Connor's expression and his tone of voice. Gavin was still working on doing better, being better when it came to how he treated androids other than Richard. If he let himself, he'd start wallowing in pity, realizing Richard deserved better than some asshole human who was the shittiest kind of advocate. Gavin didn't let himself. He was done crying for today, for the whole fucking week. He let the fury Red Eyes gave him take over again. Then why does he still show up to work, reeking of booze? One rule for Anderson, and another one for everyone else, Connor. "That's bullshit," Gavin said, his own snarl almost audible to him. Connor's brows knitted together, and his LED flickered yellow. They walked along in silence for a few strides. Connor gave a decisive nod and looked at Gavin, a thoughtful expression on his face. "A reasonable criticism, Detective. I will be more consistent in future. I think it best if I accompany you so that I can dissuade you from taking more red ice." "Fuck no. You're not coming back to my apartment, Tin Can." A flash of red at Connor's temple caught Gavin's attention. It was easy to be angry, to take out his frustration on someone else. Far easier than it should have been. Fuck. Maybe Richard was right to kick his sorry ass to the curb. "Nope. Not going there. Not now." The rapid ups and downs were distressing, and it took a lot of effort to control the need to self-regulate his emotions with stimming. Even so, Gavin found himself fiddling with the keys in his pocket. Suddenly, he regretted leaving his fidget cube and earphones on his desk. Connor led them to DPD's parking lot, where Lieutenant Anderson leaned against his car. The man looked expectantly at Connor, then with unmasked suspicion at Gavin. "What's this about, Connor? Why is this asshole with you?" Anderson asked. "I overheard a conversation between Detective Reed and Richard. I have concerns for the detective's mental state." Anderson's arms remained folded over his chest. "Uh-huh. Why can't he take himself home? He's got his bike." Now Anderson looked critically at Gavin. "Fucking Christ, you're high, aren't you? Fucking red eyes, what the fuck?" Gavin stood taller and glared daggers at Anderson. "Yeah, like you have room to criticize, you fucking alcoholic." Anderson's expression shifted to barely contained rage. Gavin stepped back involuntarily when the lieutenant pushed himself off of his car. "I'm gonna go give that plastic prick a piece of my mind." Gavin blinked, his lips parting to say something, but nothing came out. He was too flabbergasted to form a coherent sentence. Anderson was mad at Richard, and not at him. What freshly frozen hell was this? Connor placed a hand on Anderson's chest. "I will handle this, Lieutenant. You can't afford another disciplinary action against you. Stay with the detective. I need to speak to Captain Fowler."